Kiari, tell me who Kelsi is.
She's our big sister.
Yeah? Have you ever seen her?
No.
Have you ever met her?
I don't remember what she looks like, but she went up in heaven.
Kate, who is Kelsi?
She's a big sister.
How big?
Big sister. I think she's like 11 or 12 this year.
She'd be 12.
She'd be 12?
How old are you?
10.
So you never got to meet her.
And I'm 5. Because she died when she was 1.5 years old. Or 1.5 days old.
Actually, she was 2.5 days old.
2.5 days old.
What would you say to her if she were here?
That I love her and I miss her.
Kelsi is the first of my 3 younger sisters. She was the one that unfortunately didn't make it.
How old were you?
I believe I was 4 or 5. I was 4.
What do you remember?
The only thing that I really remember is sitting in your hospital bedroom waiting for you as you went to visit Kelsi in the NICU, and playing with Grandpa with one of the gloves, and we made a balloon out of it. And then I remember later on we went into a special room and they brought Kelsi out, and she was very tiny. And I remember sitting down, we had a prayer, and something told me to open my eyes, and I did, and I watched Kelsi take her very last breath. And then everyone cried. I didn't understand it, and I thought, well, everyone else is crying, so I guess I should too, but I didn't understand why.
December 25th, 2004 was a really good day. I was 23 weeks pregnant. I had a 4-year-old, and we just had a fantastic time celebrating the day. Riley, my then 4-year-old, gave us a gift for Kelsi, which was 2 little glow-in-the-dark binkies or pacifiers. However, that night I became very, very, very ill. I remember going to sleep and just feeling kind of off. And all night I had really weird dreams. And then I also ended up having quite a bit of pain, kind of just right underneath my right breast, which we now know was my liver beginning to shut down.
As the pregnancy progressed, we did run into some complications. The placenta was having some issues with blood flow going to it, and so we knew that there was some high risk involved with that at that time. The day after Christmas, Melissa was about 23 weeks pregnant at that point in time, and she just wasn't feeling very well at that point. I did check her blood pressure at that time, and it was significantly elevated, and I knew at that point there were going to be some issues with this pregnancy.
When we woke up in the morning, my husband took my blood pressure, and it was an astounding 170 over 110. So extremely high, quite vulnerable for a lot of different things. We had been having issues with the pregnancy already at that point. At 16 weeks, we had learned that there was a placental defect and that things still may not work out very well for us. However, we really had the faith that things would go okay and that things would be all right. But later that day, we went into the hospital where we found out that I was spilling quite a bit of protein. My liver was in really bad shape. The baby was not doing too great, and I had severe preeclampsia. They were not able to do an ultrasound at that time to kind of figure out what was going on. So the next morning we went in for an ultrasound, and we found out that my baby was in the 3rd percentile for weight. They estimated her at just under 500 grams, which is where they were trying to get her to be about a pound or more before we could do anything. But again, I was only about 23 and a half weeks pregnant at that point. She wasn't due until April 18th, and it is now December 12th or 26th. So kind of a not so fabulous situation to be in. Anyway, they did the ultrasound. The doctor came in, and I just remember her face as she walked in, and it just was one of dread of what she had to tell me. And I remember saying to her, well, that doesn't look good. And she looked at me and she said, it really isn't. And she kind of explained some of the things that were going on, and I wasn't quite understanding everything. And I said, well, okay, how long am I going to be here? And she said, Melissa, you won't be going home pregnant. And not quite understanding, I said, you mean I'm going to be here for 3 months? And then you could see kind of the dread come over her, and she said, Melissa, we'll be lucky if we make it through the week.
Even at that point, I felt like, okay, yeah, this is just kind of a bump in the road, kind of what I would expect in this circumstance. But as the days were progressing, the information from the doctors were not very encouraging. The blood flow seemed to be getting worse, and Melissa was getting more sick as well. She had some severe preeclampsia, which they were aggressively treating and trying to postpone any sort of delivery as long as possible. But by the end of the week, it was clearly evident that things were quickly turning downhill, and that Kelsi needed to be delivered via C-section.
Well, as time went on, we talked with different doctors, the neonatologist, we talked with, of course, the perinatologist, trying to figure out how to handle things, because severe preeclampsia is something that takes a lot of lives, not just babies, but also moms. And so we were doing this gentle balancing act between her life and my life. And I remember one night the doctor came in to me and she said, we're kind of getting close to when things need to happen, and whatever your decision is, we stand behind you 100%. And here are your options. The first option is, because we know you're sick, we know she is sick, we deliver her right now, but she won't survive the delivery. And that didn't seem like a very good option to me. So I asked for the next option. The next option was to do nothing at all for my baby and watch my health. And as soon as things started to decline on my side of things, they would deliver the baby, but she would most likely die in utero. Again, not a fabulous option for an expecting mother. So the last option was that we watch both of us, and when one of us start to have some issues, we do a C-section, and we just kind of see what she can do. And obviously that was the choice we made. So comes the morning of Thursday, December 30th. I went in for my morning ultrasound just like I always did, and I knew things were not looking good because the ultrasound tech, who had always been so excited, was all of a sudden very silent. Went back to my room. They whisked away my food tray or offered it to my husband. And I remember talking to my husband. He had not been there for the ultrasounds, so he didn't recognize that things were so different. And I said, you know, hon, that didn't go well. And he goes, oh, I thought it was fine. And I said, no, I don't think that went well at all. And within 2 minutes, my doctor was in there, and she said, Melissa, she's starting to shut her organs down. We either need to deliver her right now or we're going to lose her.
We then quickly went to the operating room within a matter of 15-20 minutes, and they started the operation. To me, it was very surreal. Just to go through all of that, it was very much a whirlwind adventure. It's like getting on a roller coaster ride right from the first day. I didn't know what was going to be the final outcome, but I always had hope that things would work out just fine in the way that they needed to be. Of course, the surgery went well in the fact that they were able to quickly get in, but because of the type of C-section, because the baby was so small, they had to do a classical C-section, which was very large on the uterus, and they were able to get the baby out rather quickly, and she gave 2 little yelps like a little kitten, and they had to whisk her away over to the other doctors, who began working on her and working on trying to get her intubated, because her lungs weren't going to be very weak. She's not going to be able to breathe on her own, so they had to hurry and get her intubated.
And we went in for an emergency C-section right then and there. I was probably under the knife within 15 minutes. And I just remember the OR was so silent. And then I heard these two little yelps. It sounded like a kitten. And the only other thing I remember hearing was my husband saying, "She's so small." I didn't get to see her really. I saw her little itty bitty teeny tiny toes, and that was it as they whisked her away to the NICU. I do remember asking her to wait for me. But during the C-section, my blood pressure spiked, and that meant that the preeclampsia was getting worse, and they had to put me on magnesium sulfate, to keep me from stroking or having a seizure. I didn't get to see Kelsi for the first day and a half, and I very vaguely remember some of the things that happened during that time because of the mag sulfate. It makes you feel terrible and awful, and I do remember that part. But I can only remember whenever anybody would walk into my room just thinking, please don't tell me she's died, because I haven't seen her yet.
For the course of the next few days, we did have the opportunity to go visit her. I know I did several times. Of course, my wife, she was not doing well right after the delivery. Her blood pressure was going up, and she was having eclampsia issues, or severe preeclampsia issues. And so they had to put her on magnesium sulfate IV drips, and for the next day and a half, she wasn't able to come down, but she was so happy to be able to come down and see her in the ICU.
I got to see her the next day, probably after about 28, 30 hours after she was born. I remember going down to the NICU, and there, I was not prepared. There I saw the tiniest baby I have ever seen. My sweet little Kelsi was born at 8.5 inches and weighing only 13 ounces, 359 grams. So she was tiny.
It was very tender to be able to reach in and just touch her. Just her little hand was even smaller than my fingernail, and she would grip my finger and hold on to it.
And her body was just absolutely small. Her whole finger didn't even, or her whole hand didn't cover up my thumb. But when I reached into the incubator, she grabbed my hand, and as I spoke, you could see her calm down and kind of turn her head a little bit, as much as she could, being on intubation. And she's the strongest little girl I've ever seen.
That was very touching. Just to be able to see such a small life and see how miraculous the process of life is.
And then my husband and I went down later that morning. My parents had brought my 4-year-old over to the hospital, and we were just kind of hanging out in the hospital room. Of course, my parents wanted to see the baby, but Garth and I went down, and at that moment, all the doctors and the nurses were working on her, and she was purple. We pretty much knew at that point we'd fought our fight, and she was dead. So we went back to our room, and we said a family prayer, and then went back down, all of us together. My husband and I went into the NICU while my parents waited with my daughter, my oldest daughter. My bishop came, and we asked them to stop all the machines and to remove her so that she didn't die on a machine. And they took us back into a small room, their bereavement room, brought her into us in this dress that was tiny but absolutely drowned her. Her diaper was the smallest that they had at the time, and it was absolutely enormous, like totally came up to her armpits. Poor little thing. And we all took our turns. We held her and said our goodbyes. And as we were holding her, my oldest daughter was sitting on my lap, and she was holding Kelsi with me, and we gave her a blessing, releasing her soul to her Father in heaven. And we watched as she took her last breath. It's the one thing so clearly that my daughter remembers. As we were saying this prayer, she opened her eyes and looked at the baby and watched Kelsi take that last breath. And Kelsi died at about 5 o'clock on New Year's Day of 2005, 4 months before she was even supposed to be born. It has been a very difficult thing to go through. At this point, we're now almost 12 years out, and as you can see, sometimes it's still a little bit raw. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think of her. I think about her every day. My girls talk about her all the time. She is as much part of our family as if she were here, as if she wasn't. Kiari is finally starting to understand that Kelsi is a sister that she just has never met. We've been very, very blessed, very fortunate, and it took a couple of years to get to the point where I actually realized that her death is a greater blessing than had she lived. Kelsi was very sick. Her lungs had collapsed. Her kidneys never worked. Her heart was strong. She had other issues where she had what's called a syndactyly, and that's where her fingers, the skin on them was still fused and didn't develop quite right during the pregnancy. And I do know life would have been rough. We would have taken it. We would have gladly accepted her, loved her, and given her everything she needed. But it really is our tender mercy that the Lord saw fit to not make her suffer that way. And it did take a couple of years. We've been very, very fortunate with the friends that we had surrounding us at the time, the family that we had surrounding us at the time. But it never changes the fact that we have a lifetime of memories that will never be made. I am the face of 1 in 4 women who have lost a pregnancy or a baby. I am the one of 17 who lost a child during a day. I am the one of 119 who lost a baby during a week. Remember your sweet children, love them, and kiss them, and never take them for granted.